you've been even remotely following along for the last couple weeks, then you know that I just got back from a 10-day trip to Japan. We visited the cities of Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, which is a really common trip for first-timers, and it's called the Golden Route. On this trip, I took a much-needed vacation and didn't actually vlog, but I did get a lot of clips along the way, and of course, I kept track of what I spent. Every single time I travel, I break down the cost and share exactly what we spent on a trip, so that's exactly what I'm going to be doing today. So if you're budgeting for a trip, if you're curious what it costs, or you just like watching my videos, this one's for you. Now, after flights and hotels, our budget came out to just under $200 US per day, so it'll be interesting to see if we were able to stick to that budget. Of course, we'll start with those big expenses, flights and lodging. Usually, I like to use points to cover as much of these expenses as I can, but we were joining onto this trip with a group of friends, so we didn't really have a lot of flexibility in when we went or where we stayed. Without that flexibility, it can be hard to maximize points, so we opted to use cash instead. To save money, we did book a flight out of Seattle, even though we live in Denver, because it was about $1,200 cheaper round trip. I have family in Seattle, so we were able to fly to Seattle the day before we left Seattle and stay with them. This is called repositioning, and it's really common to do when there's a good deal with points that doesn't exist when you book through a connecting city, but it also worked for us with cash. Anyways, the round trip was 4 different airports, so we flew Seattle to Tokyo, and then on the return, we flew Osaka to Tokyo to Seattle. This cost us $1,726 for that round trip ticket. We went in late October, which ended up being a gorgeous time weather-wise. It's not quite autumn yet there, so the fall colors weren't out, so it's not a peak travel season by any means, but I definitely thought it was a really pleasant time to be there. We flew economy in ANA, and I had never flown ANA before, but I thought the experience was wonderful. Then for hotels, we stayed a total of 4 nights in 3 different cities. Like I said, we went to Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto. The total for these hotels was $2,067, but we did have a $300 travel credit through a Capital One credit card, so we paid a total of $1,767. We booked every single one of these hotels through a travel portal on one of our credit cards, so we earned between 5 and 10 times points on each of these hotels. And then because we use credit cards to book most everything on our trips, we have some form of cancellation insurance just through those credit cards. So if you're doing this, make sure you look into what that covers. For that reason, I don't feel like I need to buy travel insurance to cover trip cancellation, but anytime I'm out of the country, I am buying travel health insurance. I usually just use SquareMouth to compare the prices. Obviously, this isn't sponsored, but I'll link them down below. Because this was a 10-day trip and we didn't have any extreme activities planned, I just wanted something that would cover a couple days in an ICU if we needed to. So I looked up the average cost of an ICU stay in Japan, and then also good coverage for a med flight back to the States in the event we needed that. So for the plan we found, my travel insurance was $13.56 to cover the 10 days, and Jake's travel insurance was $15.36. So in total, we paid $28.92 for health insurance abroad that fortunately we didn't need. Now for context, our attitude while we were there was more or less, I want it, I got it. We were there to experience food, but we are by no means Michelin star restaurant people. I'm a big fan of popping into local pubs or stopping at every single street vendor on a street. I'm not a huge like museum or organized tour group or anything like that person. I love just wandering a city, popping into stores, and getting a feel for the culture that way. So we are by no means budget travelers, but we're also not doing top-end experience things. And this also includes trying to avoid all the Instagram and TikTok famous spots. What I've found in my experience with traveling is if it is famous on a social media site, it is overpriced and Americanized. And my goal with traveling is to try to get a feel for different cultures and just kind of understand different ways of life. So I'm not really interested in doing things that are the same as home. For example, one of my trip highlights is we did a hike near a really popular site, but that took us way off the beaten path, and we ended up stumbling into a woodworker's shop. He welcomed us in and showed us his work. He was doing a bunch of restoration for some temples and then also had some of his own woodwork. And he walked us through the process of how he doesn't use sandpaper. He just smooths the wood with different chisels. And having this conversation and interaction with a local who had been just living in the woods in Japan for 40 years was one of the cooler things we did. We ended up buying something from him for 1,000 yen, which is like $6. So that experience was relatively inexpensive and very organic and unique. And that's what I'm looking for when I travel. You might relate to that or you might feel differently, but I think the context of what experiences I'm trying to have and paying for is relevant when we're talking about how much I spent on a trip. Okay, let's dive in and talk about transportation. We were able to get around all 3 cities with trains. We did a lot of wandering, and of course we averaged between like 20 and 30,000 steps a day. We both had the Suica card on our phone, which is their transit card that worked in all 3 cities. I'm not sure if it's national. And this worked really well. We just turned on the express transit option, so we could just tap our phone without using Face ID or pulling up our wallet or anything like that. We each spent a total for 10 days of $52.75 on transit, and this included transiting between Osaka and Kyoto. We also rode the bullet train from Tokyo to Osaka, and we splurged on the green car and got the business class seats, or what their equivalent of business class seats are. These were nice. They were bigger. There was footrest. It said they were gonna hand out warm towels, but they didn't. The train ride is only 2 hours, so I'm not sure that this this is worth the expense when there are reserved seats in just the regular cars, but we wanted to have a little fun with the experience, and it was only like $30 or $40 more. Our bullet train tickets came out to $257.34 for both of us, like total. If you're curious about our spending breakdown and what specifically we did day to day, I did make daily what I spent in a day's in Japan. I'll link that playlist here. It's just a bunch of shorts, you can watch those, and they're mostly accurate. So let's go ahead and just go through the totals. Food, this is everything from coffees, nice dinners, not so nice dinners, snacks, everything that we spent wandering around on food. We spent $844.58. We tried to get off the beaten path and eat at more local Japanese spots. Whenever I travel, I find that even getting a couple blocks off of those main tourist strips are where you can find really good food. There is an extra challenge when there's a language barrier, and the Japanese are not very... A lot of the local really small places don't really want to serve you if you're not Japanese. So don't feel bad if you're getting turned away. You just keep trying until someone lets you sit and eat. In general, a meal was incredibly cheap compared to the United States. So it was always kind of a game to us to see what we would spend. We also did some shopping. Now, neither of us is a huge clothes buyer, and that didn't just change because we were traveling. When I travel to Europe, specifically when I go to Spain, I do tend to buy more just because I have a Spanish body type. I very much do not have a Japanese body type. I did try on a couple things and they just weren't made for me. I love the fashion there, but we didn't spend a ton of money on clothes. So a few things we did buy were cheaper, of course, because the US dollar is stronger and yada, yada, yada. But we did go with the mission to buy a couple of handmade ceramic items that we could use when we're pulling an espresso shot, and chopsticks. We did buy a few other souvenirs, and Jake bought some clothes. So in total on shopping, we spent $252.85. This also resulted in some really fun experiences because their work trucks are called Kai trucks. I think Kai probably means work or whatever. And they're kind of a silly little truck that's super effective, and Jake just loves them. So we went on a mission to find like a Matchbox car or a model car size of that truck because they're hilarious. And we love when our shelves are full of trinkets, but not like trinkets from stores, trinkets from our life. So we wanted a little model car to put on a shelf. So we ended up going to a bunch of kids' toys stores and craft stores, and it was really cool to see the toys that they had, as well as the interactions that we got to have with some people. And then of course we did find the truck, which ended up being an adventure because we got to wander to all these places we wouldn't normally have gone to. Actually, it's up on our shelf. Let's see. This little guy. So now that guy lives on our shelf and is a fun story about how we got him and why we came about it. It's just a really fun memory. So that's some of the shopping we did. Did I tell you it was $252.85? I think I did. Okay, and then I didn't necessarily keep great track of our cash spending, but I did keep track of how much cash we pulled out. We pulled $199.35. We bought some food with cash. We bought some materials with cash. Not sure exactly the breakdown of where all that went to, but that's how much cash we spent. Overall, in the cities, a lot of things accepted card, but we did need cash for a few things. So it's helpful to have some on hand, but we definitely used cash in places that did accept a card. Some of the other miscellaneous expenses that we had on this trip were $130 for airport parking and $7.88 that we paid as a hospitality tax somewhere. So did we stick to our budget of $2,000? Yes. After flights and hotels, we spent $1,667.50. If we loop back in those flights and hotels, then we spent $5,291.11. We used 0 points, which is very unlike me, but we did book everything for this trip on credit cards, which are all fully paid off every single month. We never pay interest on those. So we earned a lot of points that we will be putting towards our next trip. If you're going, have the best time. Hopefully this helps you set expectations and kind of get a picture of how you need to budget. If you're interested in seeing more of my financial journey while I pay off debt and invest and go on more trips in the future, follow along.